She spent 8 months making herself invisible inside one of Chicago's most powerful financial firms. And the moment she stopped hiding, the most dangerous man in the city walked straight to her desk. Now Elena Ashcroft sits across from a mafia boss who controls half of Chicago, holding evidence that could destroy him, or destroy her. She thought the numbers were just numbers. She had no idea they were a death sentence. If you love stories about power, danger, and the kind of love that changes everything, hit like, drop a comment with your city, and let's see how far this story travels. The elevator opened at 7:42 in the morning, and Elena Ashcroft did not look up. That was the thing about her. She had trained herself not to look up, not at the partners when they swept past with their $100 coffees and their selective blindness, not at the senior analyst who smiled at each other across the open floor and smiled at no one else, not at the glass-walled offices where men who'd never made a spreadsheet in their lives signed off on spreadsheets they didn't read. 8 months at Hargrove Capital Management had taught Elena one durable skill that had nothing to do with finance: the art of not existing. She existed only on paper. That was safer. Her desk was in the second row from the back wall, wedged between a support column and a dying potted ficus that nobody had watered since at least March. Her monitor was slightly smaller than everyone else's. Her chair had a wobble on the left rear leg. She had put a folded business card under it on her third day and never mentioned it to facilities. Small adjustments, quiet accommodations. She had made a science of taking up exactly the right amount of space, enough to do the work, not enough to be noticed doing it. The work was what mattered. The work was the only part of this life she actually trusted. On her screen this morning, the Meridian Holdings portfolio reconciliation she'd been running for 11 days. Meridian was a client account that sat at the intersection of three separate corporate entities: Hargrove's Standard Fee Management, a private asset trust registered in Delaware, and a secondary holding structure that ran through what the paperwork called a strategic investment vehicle based out of the Cayman Islands. The account was flagged for quarterly review. The senior analyst assigned to it, Marcus Webb, had signed off on the last 2 quarters without comments. Elena had comments. She had 17 pages of comments, formatted in 11-point Calibri with proper citations, saved in a file she had named, with deliberate blandness, Meridian_review_draft_V. 4.docx. The V4 was not because she had rewritten it 4 times. The V4 was because she had spent 4 versions deciding whether or not to submit it at all. The irregularities were not subtle once you knew where to look. Shell company transfers that moved in multiples too clean to be accidental. Timing patterns across fiscal quarters that implied coordination rather than coincidence. Fee structures that existed in the documentation but not in the corresponding client agreements. Someone had been very careful. Someone had also assumed that nobody would bother to be careful back. Elena had not submitted the report. She had not submitted it because Marcus Webb drove a car she'd looked up out of curiosity. A 2023 Porsche Cayenne, $120,000, on a salary she knew from overheard HR conversations was not the salary of a man who drove a Porsche Cayenne. She had not submitted it because Patricia Haltzahalis, the department director who would receive the report, had approved the Meridian account structure in the first place. She had not submitted it because 8 months of watching this office had shown her with absolute clarity that the people with the power to do something about the problem were the same people who had decided there was no problem. She was 29 years old. She had student loans and a studio apartment with a radiator that knocked all winter and exactly one person in her life she would call in an emergency. She had come to Chicago for this job because it was the best offer she'd received out of her MBA program, and because Cincinnati felt like it was slowly swallowing her. She was not here to make enemies. She was here to do the work, build the resume, find a better job at a firm where the culture didn't feel like slow erosion, and leave cleanly. That was the plan. She pulled up Meridian_review_draft_V4.docx for the 16th time and stared at the executive summary. The elevator at the end of the floor opened again. This time, she looked up. Not because she meant to. It was the sound. The usual elevator opened with a soft hydraulic exhale and a ding. This one opened the way a door opens when someone has been waiting on the other side for a long time. A different pressure, a different weight behind it. The executive elevator, the private one, with the brass panel and the card reader. Elena had never seen it open before. 4 men came out first, and they did not look like Hargrove employees. They moved wrong for this environment, too deliberate, too wide in their spacing, eyes moving in continuous slow sweeps across the floor before any of them stepped fully off the elevator. Not security theater, actual security. The kind trained to look for exits first and people second. The floor noticed. Not loudly. There was no gasp. No one dropped anything. But the quality of the noise changed. Keyboards paused a fraction of a second longer between keystrokes. Conversations dropped half a volume register. Heads that had been angled toward monitors subtly realigned. Elena had spent 8 months learning to read this floor's ambient temperature, and right now it felt like someone had lowered the thermostat by 20 degrees without touching the controls. Then Damian Romano walked out of the elevator. She knew who he was the same way everyone in Chicago knew who he was, through a particular combination of financial journalism, careful rumor, and the kind of reputation that didn't require fact-checking because it had calcified into civic mythology. Romano Industries, the West Side real estate empire, the name attached to 3 major infrastructure contracts in the last decade and to 2 separate federal investigations that had concluded with no charges, which people discussed with the specific reverence reserved for things that should have happened and somehow didn't. There were photographs of him in business publications. They did not prepare you for the actual man. He was not what she would have expected from the photographs, which had always shown a composed, groomed figure at podiums and ribbon cuttings. In person, what struck her first was not the quality of the charcoal suit or the controlled way he held himself. What struck her was that he looked like a man who had never once in his life been uncertain about where he was going next. He moved through the open floor the way gravity moves, without apology, without variation, without any acknowledgement that the space he was crossing might belong to other people. Every senior partner who had not been in a meeting was suddenly appearing from somewhere. Patterson from his corner office, adjusting his tie. Kramer from the East Conference Room, face doing something complicated that landed between professional deference and naked anxiety. Hollis herself, Patricia Hollis, who had not set foot on the analyst floor in the 6 weeks since Elena had been trying to get 15 minutes on her calendar, was crossing the room from the stairwell door. None of them reached him. Damian Romano walked in a straight line, and the straight line ended at the second row from the back wall, wedged between a support column and a dying ficus. Elena did not look down in time. He stopped at the exact edge of her desk, not close enough to crowd her workspace, but close enough that there was no ambiguity about who he had stopped for. His eyes were dark, patient in a way that had nothing comfortable in it. The 4 men positioned themselves without being told to, a loose perimeter facing outward. Elena became aware of her coffee cup, which was a gas station travel mug with a dent in the side. She became aware of the post-it note on her monitor that said, Meridian. Check Cayman timing in her own handwriting, in blue ink, large enough to read from where he was standing. He looked at it. She did not move her hand to cover it. Elena Ashcroft, he said. Not a question. A statement of identification, the way you read a name off a document. Her voice, when it came, was steadier than she had any right to expect. Yes. You've been running an independent review on the Meridian Holdings account. Again, not a question. Patricia Hollis had gone very still somewhere behind and to Elena's left. Marcus Webb, whose desk was 3 rows up, had stopped typing with a completeness that felt final. I was assigned the quarterly reconciliation, Elena said. Standard procedure. Standard procedure was signed off 3 weeks ago. He glanced at her screen where Meridian_review_draft_v4.docx was open and visible and damning. You're still working. She should have said something minimal. She should have said she was just double-checking methodology. She should have deployed any one of the small deflections she'd spent 8 months perfecting in this office. Instead, she said, there are irregularities that weren't addressed in the standard review. The floor was absolutely silent. She felt the specific quality of that silence, the held breath of 18 people watching something happen that they were going to have to decide very quickly whether to pretend they had not seen. Damian Romano looked at her for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. There was nothing warm in it and nothing threatening, exactly. It was an assessment. She had the distinct, uncomfortable sense that she was being read the way she read financial documents, for what was there and for what had been deliberately left out. Walk with me, he said. I'm in the middle of... Ms. Ashcroft. The way he said it wasn't loud. It wasn't anything that would read as intimidating on a transcript, and yet it landed with the specific weight of a thing that had already been decided. Elena looked at her screen. She looked at the post-it note. She thought about the folded business card under the left rear leg of her chair, and all the small, careful ways she had arranged herself to fit inside this particular slot of life without friction. She saved the document. She stood up. The conference room he was taken to was not one Elena had ever used. It was on the far end of the executive floor, past the partners' suites, a room she'd understood instinctively as belonging to a different tier of the building's social hierarchy. Floor-to-ceiling glass on two sides, the city laid out below like a demonstration of scale. Leather chairs around an oval table, a credenza with a coffee service that had not been touched. The four men stayed outside. Hollis and Patterson had followed them as far as the hallway and then stopped, in the manner of people who understood exactly where their escort ended. Romano sat down. He did not gesture for her to sit, but she sat anyway across the table and was briefly grateful for the width of the table between them. He opened a leather folio and set 2 pages in front of her. She looked at them. They were her own analysis, but not from Meridian_review_draft_v4.docx. These were from a preliminary working document she had saved on the Hargrove internal server 12 days ago under a nondescript file name. Notes, still rough, not formatted for submission. Someone had printed them. "How long have you been looking at this?" he asked. She could lie about the timeline. She could make it shorter, frame it as casual, incidental, a thing she'd stumbled into without pursuing. She had been lying by omission for 8 months in this building, and she was by now technically proficient at it. 11 days on the formal review, she said. I flagged the underlying structure about 3 weeks before that when I was doing onboarding documentation for a related account. And you didn't submit the formal report. No? Why not? It was still not quite a question, but it had a different quality than the earlier statements. She thought about it. She thought about Marcus Webb's Porsche and Patricia Hollis's approvals and the 17 pages of careful documentation she had not sent anywhere. Because I didn't know where to send it, she said. Everyone with standing to receive a report of that nature has standing in the problem. He was quiet for a moment. Outside the glass, Chicago moved in its enormous, indifferent way, 40 stories below. Tell me what you found, he said. She told him. She started with the shell company structure. 3 entities, each legitimately registered, each with genuine operational histories, but connected through a pattern of inter-entity transfers that served no plausible operational purpose. The timing. She laid out the timing in detail because the timing was where the human element showed through the corporate architecture, the transfers clustering in the 3 days before quarter-end reporting, then adjusting in the 4 days after, a rhythm too consistent to be coincidence and too precise to be accident. Then the fee structures. The discrepancy between what was documented in the client service agreements and what was actually being charged. The delta running to approximately $2.3 million over the period she'd been able to review, with a probable extension of the pattern into earlier quarters she hadn't yet fully analyzed. She spoke for 14 minutes without looking away from the pages in front of her. When she finished, she looked up. He was watching her with the same quality of attention he'd brought to her desk. Patient, complete, the kind of focus that costs something to maintain and which he appeared to maintain without effort. $2.3 million, he said. Conservatively, for the period I've reviewed. The actual number, he said, is closer to 11. Elena set down the pen she'd been holding. He said it the way someone says a thing they have known for a while and have been waiting for the right moment to say. Not with anger. With a flatness that was somehow worse than anger. Someone inside this organization, he continued, has been stealing from accounts that belong to me, not from Hargrove Capital, from me, personally. The Meridian structure is one piece of it. There are 4 other structures you haven't seen yet. She heard her own breathing in the quiet of the room. She was aware that she was sitting 40 stories above Chicago in a glass room with a man whose name was attached to 2 federal investigations, being told that she had accidentally found evidence of a crime committed against him, and that he had known about it long enough to have a leather folio prepared. What do you want from me? She said. He looked at her. I want you to finish what you started, he said. All of it. Not just Meridian, the full network. I need someone who found what my own analysts were paid to overlook, And I need that person to be someone who isn't inside the problem already. I'm a junior financial analyst. You're the only person in this building who filed anything in 11 days. She thought about her studio apartment, about the radiator, about the business card under the chair leg, about what it meant to say yes to this versus what it meant to say no, and whether saying no was actually an option in a room where the exits were guarded by men who moved wrong. I'd need access to the full account documentation, she said, not redacted versions, the actual underlying agreements. Something shifted slightly in his expression. It was not a smile. She would have distrusted a smile. It was more like a very small recalibration, the adjustment of a man who had expected resistance and had received instead conditions. You'll have it, he said. She stood when he stood. They walked back through the executive floor, and this time when she passed her desk, she saw Marcus Webb watching her with an expression she recognized. It was the expression of someone who had just understood that the shape of a room had changed, and who had not yet figured out what that meant for his specific position in it. Damian Romano stopped at the elevator. The four men reoriented without a word. Hargrove's HR will be notified of your reassignment to a special project, he said. Direct report to me. You'll have an office on the 38th floor starting tomorrow morning. I haven't said yes yet, she said. He pressed the elevator button. You didn't say no either. The elevator closed. Elena stood in the middle of the floor, her gas station travel mug in her hand, and felt the weight of 17 people's attention on her back. She walked back to her desk. She sat down. She put the mug next to her keyboard. She opened meridian_review_draft_v4.docx. She saved it to a flash drive she kept in her desk drawer, one she'd bought at a pharmacy 2 weeks ago without any particular plan for why she might need it. Only a sense that at some point she probably would. She put the flash drive in her jacket pocket. Then she opened her email and stared at an empty compose window for a long time before she closed it without writing anything. The day moved. People drifted past her desk with a new and careful distance. Marcus Webb left for lunch 30 minutes early and did not come back. Patricia Hollis's office door stayed closed. The floor had a new quality to its ambient noise, not quite fear, but something adjacent to it. The sound of people recalculating. At 4:17 in the afternoon, Elena received an email from Hargrove Capital's HR department. It was 3 sentences long. It confirmed her temporary reassignment to a special project under the direct oversight of the firm's primary strategic partner, effective the following morning. It said her current duties would be covered by another team member. It thanked her for her flexibility. She stared at it. She thought about the number 11 million. She thought about the shell companies, the timing patterns, the fee discrepancies. She thought about the 4 structures she hadn't seen yet and what they might contain, and what it meant that those structures existed inside a financial empire whose legitimate face was Romano Industries, and whose other face she had so far only glimpsed in the negative space of other people's careful inattention. She thought about the way Damian Romano had said, the actual number is closer to 11. Not with surprise, not with outrage. With the flat containing patience of a man who had already made his decision about what to do with the information and was now in the execution phase. She thought about what execution meant in that specific context, and then she made herself stop thinking about it and focus on what she could actually hold in her hands. What she could hold was this. Someone inside Romano's organization had stolen $11 million and structured the theft through accounts that ran through this firm, through Marcus Webb's careless sign-offs and Patricia Hollis's original approvals. Someone had done it carefully, over time, with enough operational sophistication to obscure it from every layer of institutional review, except a junior analyst who ate lunch alone and had too much time and too little self-preservation instinct. The theft was real. The evidence was real. The man who owned the stolen money was real, and he had walked directly to her desk this morning with a printed copy of her private working notes. She closed her email. She looked at her monitor, at the Meridian documentation, the shell company maps she'd built in a separate spreadsheet, the timeline charts. She was afraid. She wanted to be honest with herself about that. Not the sharp, adrenaline kind of afraid, the slower kind. The kind that settles in the stomach and stays there, adjusting its weight as new information arrives, reminding you with every heartbeat that you have put your hand on something that was not supposed to be touched. But underneath the fear was something else, something she had less practice naming. She had found something that everyone with more power than her had chosen not to find. She had built 17 pages of documented, sourced, cross-referenced evidence that pointed cleanly at a crime, and she had built it alone, in the margins of her assigned work, because the numbers had refused to add up, and she was constitutionally incapable of leaving numbers that didn't add up. $11 million. 4 more structures she hadn't seen. She picked up her bag. She shut down her monitor. She walked to the elevator, the regular one, not the brass panel one, and wrote it down 40 stories to the street. Outside, Chicago was doing what Chicago did in October. Gray sky pressing down hard, wind off the lake with teeth in it, the smell of rain that hadn't quite committed yet. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, collar up, her hand around the flash drive in her pocket. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered. Ms. Ashcroft. A voice she didn't know. Male, even. Bureaucratic. Mr. Romano would like to confirm that you'll be available at 7 tomorrow morning, 38th floor. She looked up at the building. 40 stories of glass and steel, darkening in the afternoon light. Tell him yes, she said. She started walking toward the L station. Behind her, on the 38th floor of Hargrove Capital Management's Chicago headquarters, in the secondary server room that she had never had clearance to access, a man she didn't yet know named Victor Lang was looking at a notification on his screen, an access log showing that a junior financial analyst had opened and saved the Meridian Holdings file 6 times today. He picked up his phone. He did not call Damian Romano. He called someone else. And 3 blocks away, Elena Ashcroft walked into the wind with 11 million reasons to be afraid, and 17 pages of evidence that she had no idea were already a target on her back. The 38th floor smelled different from the analyst floor. Elena noticed it the moment the elevator opened at 6:58 in the morning, 2 minutes before she'd been told to arrive, because she was constitutionally incapable of being late, and this morning especially, she had not wanted to give anyone a reason to look at her sideways before she'd even sat down. The smell was leather and climate-controlled air, and something underneath both of those things that she couldn't name precisely, only register as the smell of a space where consequential decisions got made, and the consequences were not abstract. The floor was half the size of the analyst floor. No open bullpen. A corridor with 4 closed doors on each side. All of them dark wood with no nameplates. At the far end, a corner office with floor-to-ceiling glass on 2 sides. The same view as the conference room yesterday. Chicago spread out like a circuit board. The lake a hard gray line at the eastern edge. A woman was waiting for her at the elevator. Mid-40s, dark suit, the specific posture of someone who had been doing this exact job for a long time and had developed absolute economy of motion as a result. Ms. Ashcroft? I'm Carla. No last name. I'll show you your workspace. The workspace was the second door on the left. It was larger than her entire apartment's living area. It had a desk that did not wobble, 2 monitors already powered on, and a stack of bound document files approximately 8 inches thick sitting centered on the blotter. The files Mr. Romano authorized, Carla said. Full account documentation on 4 additional structures. Access credentials for the restricted server partition are on the top page. She looked at Elena with a neutrality so complete it had its own texture. Mr. Romano will meet with you at 9. Elena set her bag down. She looked at the stack of files. Is there coffee? She said. Down the hall, left. Carla left. Elena sat down, moved the top file off the stack, and started reading. By 8:40, she had a headache behind her left eye, and 3 pages of handwritten notes, and the specific feeling she got when a pattern she'd suspected turned out to be both correct and significantly larger than she'd anticipated. The 4 structures were variations on the Meridian model. Shell companies, offshore accounts, inter-entity transfers timed to quarter-end windows. But they were more sophisticated. Whoever had designed Meridian had learned from it, or Meridian had been the prototype, and these were the refined versions. The operational logic was tighter. The paper trail required reading across multiple entities simultaneously to see the shape of it. Any single document looked defensible in isolation. You had to hold 5 things in your head at once to understand what you were actually looking at. Elena had always been able to hold 5 things in her head at once. It was not a skill she'd been taught. It was something closer to a structural defect, an inability to look at a part without also seeing how it connected to the whole, which had made her strange and difficult all through school, and which had, apparently made her useful here. Useful to a man whose name was in federal investigation files. She wrote that down too. Not on the notepad, in her own head, in the running list she was maintaining of things she knew and things she needed to think about more carefully. At exactly 9 o'clock, Damian Romano opened her office door without knocking. He was dressed differently from yesterday. No suit jacket, shirt sleeves rolled to the forearm, the kind of informality that on another man might have read as casual and on him read only as a different register of control. He looked at her notes. He looked at the files she'd already worked through, which she'd separated into 2 stacks, reviewed and flagged. "You've been here since before 7, he said. The files were here. He sat down across from her, not in the chair Carla had presumably placed for visitors, but on the edge of the desk itself, which was a very specific spatial choice. She noted it without reacting to it. "What have you found?" he said. "The same architecture as Meridian across all 4 structures, but more developed. Whoever designed this understood how quarterly audit windows work at the documentation level. The transfers are timed to create a 3-day gap between when the movement shows on one entity's books and when it shows on the corresponding entity. Long enough to pass a standard review. Short enough to complete before month-end reconciliation. Can you quantify it?" "Not yet. I need another day with the documents before I give you a number I'd stand behind." "Estimate." She looked at him. She thought about the difference between an estimate and a guess and decided he understood the difference. 20 million, possibly more. The structures have been running longer than Meridian. One of them has documentation going back 4 years. The room was very quiet. 4 years? He said. Yes. He stood up from the desk. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to her for a moment, looking at the city, and in that moment Elena saw something she hadn't expected. Not rage exactly, but the physical effort of containing something that wanted to move differently. His shoulders, the set of his jaw and profile. A man exercising a discipline so habitual it had become structural, and finding it tested. He turned back around. Whatever she'd seen was gone. "I want daily updates," he said. "Written. You send them directly to me. No intermediary. You don't discuss the work with anyone on this floor or below it." "Understood." "You have a question," he said. She did. She'd been deciding since yesterday whether to ask it. "The people who approved the structures on Hargrove's side," she said. "Hollis, Webb. Were they paid or were they threatened?" He looked at her for a beat. "Does it change your analysis?" "No. It changes my read on how contained the problem is." "Paid," he said. "Both of them. Webb for 4 years. Hollis was brought in 18 months ago when the structure needed internal audit cover. He said it without particular emotion, the way a doctor reads a diagnosis. Not indifferent, but past the phase of being surprised by it. Are there others inside Hargrove you suspect? Not yet. But I've only looked at the documents you gave me. If I had access to the broader HR compensation records for the analytics division and the internal audit sign-off logs for the last 5 years, you'll have them by this afternoon." He left without further discussion. Elena looked at the door he'd closed behind him. She picked up her pen. She went back to the files. The day passed in the specific way that days pass when you are deep inside work that matters. Hours that evaporated without her registering their movement, interrupted by coffee she forgot to drink and a lunch that Carla set on the corner of her desk at noon without comment. By 3 in the afternoon, she had a preliminary number, 23.4 million, with a margin of analysis she put at plus or minus 15% given the documents she currently had access to. She had the names of 2 additional Hargrove employees who appeared in the compensation and approval records in patterns she didn't like. She also had a name she hadn't expected, Victor Lang. She'd seen it first in a footnote, an authorization signature on one of the shell company formation documents, a secondary signatory that would have been invisible if she hadn't been cross-referencing authorization chains. She'd checked it against the Hargrove employee directory. Victor Lang, Senior Vice President of Strategic Development, an executive, not an analyst, someone who operated 2 floors above the irregularities, with authority to move between the corporate and private investment sides of the firm's structure. She pulled his authorization signatures from every document she could find them in. She laid them out chronologically. His name appeared in the structure from the beginning, not as an occasional co-signer, as a consistent presence at every significant decision point: entity formation, transfer authorization, account structure modification. He wasn't peripheral to the theft. He was architectural to it. He had built it, or he had enabled it being built. And the difference between those two things mattered less than the fact that for 4 years, every time the structure had needed someone with SVP-level authorization to proceed, Victor Lang had been there with a pen. She sat with that for a while. Then she wrote it up. Clean, sourced, cited. She sent it directly to the email address Romano had given her that morning. Not a Hargrove address. A private domain she didn't recognize. His response came back in 4 minutes. Continue. Do not access Lang's current files without authorization. I'll be in contact tonight. Tonight. She looked at the word. She looked at her 3 pages of handwritten notes and the stack of files still unread and the city going dark outside the glass. She thought about Victor Lang, senior vice president, whose name was at the foundation of a $23 million theft from a man whose other employees didn't meet his eyes in corridors. She hoped he didn't know she'd found it yet. She wasn't sure of that hope. The restaurant was on the 42nd floor of a building 4 blocks from Hargrove. Elena had not been told it was a restaurant until the car that appeared outside her building at 7:15 that evening delivered her to a private entrance and a maitre d' who used her name without her giving it. The elevator had no buttons. It opened at 1 floor only, and that floor was a room of maybe 8 tables, half of them empty, floor-to-ceiling glass on the north and east walls. Chicago blazing below in the dark. Damian Romano was already seated. He had changed. Full suit again, dark, no tie. He stood when she came in, an automatic courtesy that sat oddly with everything else she knew and didn't know about him, like a behavioral artifact from a different context. She sat down across from him and put her bag on the chair beside her and did not comment on the restaurant. "You found Lang," he said. "Yes. Why didn't you tell me to look for him specifically?" "Because I wanted to know if you'd find him without being pointed at him." She processed that. It was not a comfortable thing to process. The implication that she had been, at some level, tested. That the authorization she'd been given was calibrated to see what she would do with it. "And if I hadn't," she said, "then I would have learned something different about your abilities." "What did you learn?" He was looking at her in that way he had, the reading a document quality, complete and unhurried. "That you're thorough," he said, "and that you follow the evidence without deciding in advance where it's going." The waiter appeared. She ordered water and whatever the fish was. Romano ordered nothing, which suggested he had either already ordered or didn't intend to eat, and neither option she could read clearly. "Lang has been inside Romano Industries for 6 years, he said, once the waiter had gone. "He came in as a legitimate hire. He's competent, that's not in question. He built real things, the infrastructure contracts, the West Loop development. He did the work." He paused. And somewhere along the way he decided the work entitled him to more than he was receiving. "The people he's feeding information to," Elena said. "The rival organizations mentioned in your—" She stopped. She hadn't been officially told there were rival organizations. She had inferred it from the pattern of transfer timing, which in 2 cases appeared to correlate with known competitive bids on Romano Industries projects in a way that suggested advanced intelligence sharing. He looked at her. "You pulled the project bid records too," he said. "I was looking at the timing patterns." "The Marchetti Group," he said, "based in Milwaukee. They've been trying to establish Chicago operations for 3 years. Lang has been their road in." Marchetti. She filed the name. She thought about what it meant. Not just financial theft, but competitive intelligence, organizational intelligence, the kind of information that in this specific industry, legal and otherwise, could be used in ways that went significantly beyond accounting fraud. "He's not just stealing money," she said. "No," Romano said. "He's not." They ate. Or Elena ate. The fish was excellent, which felt surreal, and she ate it with the specific mechanical focus of someone fueling a machine rather than enjoying a meal. Romano drank water and watched the city and occasionally asked her questions about the documentation. Precise questions that told her he understood accounting structures well enough to know exactly what she'd found. At some point the conversation shifted, not dramatically, not with any marker she could identify. They were talking about the fee structure discrepancy in the earliest of the 4 formations, and then they were talking about why she'd become a financial analyst, and she was answering before she'd decided to answer. "I'm good at it," she said. "That's the honest version. That's not an answer to why." The longer version is that I grew up watching my mother's finances get mismanaged by people who were supposed to be helping her. After my father left, she was working 2 jobs and trusting people with what she managed to save. And they were... She stopped. She lost most of it, twice, to people who were technically doing everything legally. He was listening. "I thought if I understood how it worked from the inside," she said, "I could at least make sure it didn't happen again. To her. Or to people like her." She heard herself say it and felt the specific embarrassment of having said something true in a context where it didn't entirely belong. "And then you ended up here," he said. "And then I ended up here." Something in his expression, not warmth exactly, but a slight lessening of the flatness. A gap in the surface. "My father built the first legitimate piece of Romano Industries from money that wasn't legitimate," he said. "It was delivered the same way she'd delivered her own disclosure, without decoration, without apology. He was very clear with me about the distinction. He wanted the legitimate side to be real, not cover, actual infrastructure, actual employment, actual value." "I shall see this." He paused. He was also very clear that the other side was what made the legitimate side possible, and that I would have to decide what to do with that inheritance. "What did you decide?" she said. He looked at her. "I'm still deciding," he said. The car took her home at 10:30. She sat in the back seat watching the city move past and thinking about Victor Lang's signature at the bottom of a Shell Company formation document dated 4 years ago, and about a man 40 stories above Chicago who was still deciding something about his own life, and about the flash drive in her jacket pocket that she had not yet decided what to do with. She got home. She locked the door. She checked it twice. She did not sleep well. The next 3 days moved in a pattern. Early mornings on the 38th floor, days buried in documents, evenings that ended later than she planned. The work expanded as she'd expected it to. Each answer generated 2 adjacent questions. Each confirmed structure implied related structures. Each name in an authorization chain connected to a network of other names that required examination. She built a master document she called network_full.xlsx, a sprawling cross-referenced map of entities, signatories, timing correlations, and fund flows. It grew daily. On the 3rd day, Carla knocked on her door at mid-afternoon. "Mr. Lang is here," Carla said. Her voice was exactly the same as every other time she'd said anything. "He asked to see you." Elena's hand stopped moving on her keyboard. She thought about Romano's instruction. Do not access Lang's current files without authorization. He hadn't said anything about Lang coming to her. "Send him in," she said. Victor Lang was not what she'd expected from the signature on the documents. She'd built a mental image without meaning to. The image that the architectural precision of his authorization trail had implied. Careful. Controlled. Probably unremarkable in appearance, the kind of person whose competence was the most visible thing about him. He was tall and well-dressed, and approximately 50, with the easy confidence of a man who had spent 2 decades in rooms where confidence was currency. He was handsome in an aggressively conventional way. He smiled when he came in. She distrusted the smile immediately and thoroughly. "Ms. Ashcroft," he said, and his voice was exactly calibrated, warm enough to be collegial, measured enough to imply seniority. "I've been hearing good things about the special project. Mind if I sit?" He was already sitting. "What can I do for you, Mr. Lang?" she said. "Victor, please." He looked around the office with the relaxed proprietary ease of a man who had been on this floor longer than she had and wanted her to feel that. "I wanted to introduce myself. Given that you're now working so closely with Damien's core accounts, it makes sense for us to be acquainted. I manage a significant portion of the strategic investment side. Our work will overlap." "I was told to direct questions to Mr. Romano directly," she said. "Of course, absolutely." He smiled again. The smile did not move the upper part of his face. "I'm not here to interfere with your process. Just collegial introduction. How are you finding the work?" "Complex," she said. "It always is at first." He leaned back. "Damien has a very particular way of structuring his holdings. It takes time to develop the intuition for it. A pause, small and precisely placed. What accounts has he had you looking at so far? She looked at him. She thought about his signature at the bottom of a shell company formation document. She thought about $23 million in 4 years and the Marchetti Group in Milwaukee and what Rodin meant in concrete operational terms. I'm not in a position to discuss the scope of the project, she said. I'm sure you understand. The smile stayed. Something behind it shifted by a fraction. Of course, he said. Professional discretion. I respect that. He stood. He buttoned his jacket. He was entirely composed and entirely readable to her in this moment, which was the most frightening part. She could see the calculation happening, the assessment, the rapid, quiet conclusion being reached behind the collegial surface. We'll talk again soon, I'm sure. He left. Elena sat very still for approximately 30 seconds. Then she opened a new email to Romano's private address and typed 4 words. Lang just visited me. The response came in 2 minutes. Don't be alone on that floor after 6. I'm sending someone. She looked at the email. She looked at the door Lang had closed behind him. She pulled network_full.xlsx back up on her screen. She looked at his name, appearing 14 times across the authorization chains. 14 times, over 4 years, signing documents that built a structure designed to drain $23 million from a man whose organization had a very specific way of handling people who stole from it. And now he'd come to look at her face. She understood what that meant. She understood it the way she understood numbers, not emotionally, first, structurally. He had come to see what she knew, and the fact that he'd come meant he already suspected she knew enough to matter. Her phone buzzed on the desk. Unknown number, same as the first call. She answered. Ms. Ashcroft. Not the same voice as before. This one she recognized. Don't leave the building alone tonight. Use the private exit on the 36th floor. Carla will show you. Mr. Romano. Lang made a call 20 minutes after he left your office, he said. We intercepted the number. It went to a Marchetti associate in the West Loop. She stopped breathing for exactly 1 second. What did he say? She said. He said he needed to know how much time he had. Romano's voice had the same flatness she'd come to recognize. Not cold exactly. Contained. Elena. It was the first time he'd used her first name. He knows what you found, he said, and he knows that once I have the full documented analysis, there's no version of this that ends well for him, which means the window in which he can do something about it is closing. She looked at her screen. At network_full.xlsx, at 14 signatures, at $23 million, at the clean, terrible logic of a man who'd spent 4 years building something and could now see it being disassembled line by line from 2 floors below. How long do I have? She said. To finish the analysis? 2 days? Maybe less. A pause. Can you do it? She looked at the stack of files still unread on her left. She looked at her notes. She thought about the business card under her chair leg downstairs, and the flash drive in her pocket, and her mother's savings going twice into the hands of people who had been technically legal about taking it. Yes, she said. Then finish it. Another pause, different from the first. And Elena, when this is over, there are things I need to tell you. About what this organization actually is, about what you've walked into. She had known, in the way you know a thing you haven't let yourself fully articulate yet. She had known from the federal investigation files, and the men who moved wrong, and the private elevator, and the specific way 40 floors of Chicago went quiet when he walked through them. She had known, and she had kept working anyway. I already know, she said. You know the surface, he said. You don't know the depth. The line went quiet for a moment. Outside her window, Chicago burned orange and white in the dark, enormous and indifferent, 40 stories below. Tomorrow night, he said. Dinner. I'll tell you everything. She almost said, that's not necessary. She almost said, I just need the documents. She almost said any one of the careful, distancing things she would have said a week ago to keep herself exactly the right size for whatever slot she occupied. All right, she said instead. She hung up. She looked at her door. Down the hall, somewhere behind one of the dark wood panels, she heard the soft sound of the private elevator opening. The one with the brass panel and the card reader, the one she'd watched open for the first time 4 days ago and which had brought her here, to this office, to this desk, to a name in a spreadsheet that was now a man who had been in her chair 20 minutes ago, calculating how much. She finished the analysis at 11:47 the following night, not 2 days. 1. She had not gone home. Carla had left a blanket on the corner chair at some point after midnight, and Elena had not used it, but she'd registered it. The small practical acknowledgement that this was now the kind of work that did not stop for sleep. She'd sent the final version of network_full.xlsx to Romano's private address at 11:47 with a cover document that was 11 pages of sourced, cited, cross-referenced findings. 23.1 million, confirmed, 4 structures. 14 authorization signatures belonging to Victor Lang, 2 additional Hargrove employees. A transaction timeline running back 51 months. She'd attached the flash drive contents too. Everything she'd copied on the first day, before she'd known the full shape of it. His response came at 11:52. Good work. Car at your exit in 10 minutes. Tomorrow night still stands. She looked at that for a while. Then she shut down both monitors, put on her jacket, picked up her bag, and walked down the hall toward the 36th floor exit the way Carla had shown her, taking the route that avoided the lobby, avoiding the places where a man who'd made a phone call to a Marchetti associate would expect her to be. The car was there. She got in. She did not look at her phone again until she was inside her apartment with the door locked and the chain on. And then she sat on her couch in her coat and stared at the opposite wall for a long time without doing anything in particular. She thought about what Romano had said. You know the surface. You don't know the depth. She thought about tomorrow night. She thought about Victor Lang sitting in her chair, smiling with the bottom half of his face, calculating. She set her alarm for 6 and did not sleep until after 3. And when she slept, it was the bad kind, thin and full of numbers that wouldn't balance. The restaurant was different this time. Not a public venue. Private. A floor of a building in River North that appeared from the outside to be a residential tower. The elevator opened into a room that felt like someone's home. A long dining table, a kitchen visible through an open doorway, art on the walls that looked chosen rather than installed. The city was still there through the north-facing windows, but at a different angle, less demonstrative than the 42nd floor view, more intimate in the way that things you don't show everyone are intimate. Damian Romano was standing at the window when she came in. He turned when he heard her. She had, over the previous 5 days, built up a working model of him assembled from observation, the controlled authority, the patience that was not gentleness, the specific economy of a man who had learned that most movements were optional. The model had been functional. It had allowed her to operate in his proximity without the kind of distraction that proximity to someone like him produced in most people. Standing in this room, in this light, with the Chicago night behind him, she felt the model's limitations acutely. You finished early, he said. The structure was coherent once I had the full document set. It moved quickly. Sit down. They sat. There was food already on the table. Actual food, not the strategic restaurant performance of the previous dinner. Something that had been cooked here, in that kitchen. She noted it without commenting on it. He poured water. He did not perform hospitality and did not require her to perform appreciation of it, which she found she was grateful for. I'll tell you what this organization is, he said, and then you can decide what you do with that information. She looked at him. You're giving me a choice? I'm telling you what the choice costs, he said. That's different. She waited. He told her. Not everything. She understood as he spoke that there were depths below the depths he was describing, levels of the organization that he was summarizing rather than detailing, partly from discretion and partly, she thought, because some of it was not narratable in the abstract. You had to have been in certain rooms to understand certain things. But he told her enough. The criminal organization that existed alongside Romano Industries, the territories it operated in, the enforcement structures, the alliances and the enmities and the specific geography of Chicago's criminal landscape as it had existed for 30 years and as it existed now under his management. He told her how he had inherited it. Not chose it, inherited it. The distinction he drew was precise, and she believed it was real. He told her what it meant that Victor Lang had been feeding information to the Marchetti Group for 4 years. Not just the money, the intelligence, organizational structure, personnel. The locations of things that should not have locations known outside the organization. He didn't just steal from the accounts, Elena said. She heard her own voice coming out flat. He was building them a map. Yes. A map of what? Romano looked at her steadily. Of everything they'd need to move against us when the time was right. She sat with that. The number 23 million reconfigured itself in her understanding. It was not the crime, she realized. It was the financing. Lang had been moving money out of Romano's organization and into Marchetti's operational fund, building the war chest for whatever came next while simultaneously providing the intelligence to make it effective. When? She said. We don't know the timeline. That's what I need to determine before I move against him. He paused. The analysis you finished last night. That gives me the financial evidence. It documents the theft. But it doesn't tell me how far the operational intelligence sharing went, or who inside the organization he's been talking to. You think there are others? Lang didn't operate this alone for 4 years without internal support. Someone with physical access to operational files. Not a financial person, someone closer to the ground. The dinner went quiet for a moment. Elena ate. She was aware of the specific strangeness of eating a meal someone had cooked in a kitchen 20 feet away while discussing the architecture of a criminal conspiracy. And she was aware that the strangeness had a shorter half-life than she would have predicted a week ago. She was adjusting to things faster than was probably advisable. What happens to Lang, she said, when you move against him? Romano looked at her. He did not answer immediately, which was itself an answer of a kind. I need you to understand something, he said. The world you've been working inside this week, it doesn't resolve the way corporate fraud resolves. There's no filing with the SEC. There's no referral to a compliance committee. I know that. Do you? She put down her fork. She looked at him directly. I found evidence of a $23 million theft from a criminal organization committed by a man who has been building an intelligence package for a rival criminal organization for 4 years. I'm not confused about what category of problem this is. Something shifted in his face. The same fractional gap in the surface she'd seen the night before. Not warmth, but the edge of it. The place where the controlled flatness had a seam. No, he said. You're not, are you? They were looking at each other across the table, and Elena was aware of the precise distance between them, the width of the table, the length of an arm, and the way that distance had been changing, incrementally, since the moment he'd walked to her desk 5 days ago. She did not move closer to it or further from it. She let it exist. After this is over, she said, what happens to me? What do you want to happen? I want to go back to work, she said. Real work. The financial division. Legitimately. Not because of you. Because I'm good at it, and the department is badly managed, and someone should fix it. He was quiet for a moment. You're negotiating, he said. I'm stating a preference. In the middle of an active, you asked what I want. She picked up her fork again. That's what I want. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Too controlled for a laugh, but adjacent to one. She had not heard anything like it from him before. It lasted approximately 1 second, and then it was gone. But it had been there, and she noted it. After this is over, he said, we'll discuss it. The car came at 10. She was in the lobby waiting for it when the door from the stairwell opened. Victor Lang walked in. He was not alone. 2 men behind him, neither of whom she recognized, both of whom had the same quality of movement as Romano's security. Deliberate, wide-spaced, eyes continuous. For 1 second, all 3 of them were still. Lang looked at her. She looked at Lang. She thought about the stairwell and the elevator and the door to the street and the car that was due in approximately 4 minutes. And she thought about all of those options in the rapid calculus of a person whose brain had been trained on patterns and was now applying that training to a geometry problem that had nothing to do with finance. The elevator door opened. Damian Romano stepped out. He took in the room in one pass. Elena, Lang, the 2 men, the spatial arrangement, the complete absence of coincidence in any of it. And his face went to a stillness so total it looked like something carved. Victor, he said. Lang did not move for a moment. Then he smiled. The same smile from Elena's office, the one that didn't move the upper part of his face. Damian, I was in the building. I thought I'd come up. You were in the building, Romano said. I had a meeting nearby. At 10 at night, Lang's eyes moved to Elena and then back. I didn't realize you had company. You knew exactly what company I had, Romano said. His voice had not changed in volume or register. It was the same controlled, flat delivery it always was. And yet something in the room changed when he said it. A pressure shift, the way the air moves differently before weather. Lang's two men stepped forward slightly. Romano's four, Elena hadn't seen them, hadn't tracked where they'd come from, were suddenly present, positioned, without any signal she'd seen pass between anyone. Lang looked at the room. He did the math. She could see him doing it. This is a misunderstanding, he said. Is it? Damien, you made a call from this building's parking structure 40 minutes ago, Romano said, to a number registered to a shell corporation in Kenosha that is a Marchetti Communications front. We flagged the number 3 weeks ago. He took one step forward, just one, unhurried. What did you tell them, Victor? The smile was gone. What replaced it was something Elena had not seen on a human face in person before. The specific expression of a man who has been running a very long calculation and has just reached the line where the numbers stop working. I want my lawyer, Lang said. You're not under arrest, Romano said. You're in my building at 10 o'clock at night after calling a Marchetti front number. In my building, Victor, the one you've been in for 6 years, the one I gave you a floor of. Long said nothing. 48 hours, Romano said. I want the full operational intelligence package you've been building. Names, files, timeline, everything you gave them and everything you were planning to give them. You bring it to me voluntarily and we resolve this between us. He paused. Or I take it from you. The space between the last two sentences was approximately 2 seconds. Elena stood very still and understood that she was witnessing the moment at which a very long, careful, elaborately constructed deception was being dismantled in real time, and that the man it was being dismantled in front of was deciding, right now, which version of what came next he was going to choose. Lang looked at Elena. It was a specific look, not threatening, not the collegial performance of the office visit. Something raw. An assessment that contained, she thought, a genuine question. How much did you find, and how much time did you cost me? I'll be in touch, Lang said. He left. His two men left. The door closed. Elena realized she'd been holding her breath. She let it out. Romano turned to her. His eyes moved over her with a quick practical assessment, checking, she understood, that she was physically unharmed. And then he said, The car is outside. I know what he's going to do, she said. Elena, he's not going to bring you the files. He made the call 40 minutes ago. Whatever he was moving, it's already in motion. He knows the window closed tonight. She heard her own voice. Steady, she was surprised to find. Level. The same voice she used when she had to deliver findings she didn't want to deliver. You won't get 48 hours. He'll run or he'll accelerate. And accelerate is more likely because he's spent 4 years building toward something, and he's not a man who walks away from 4 years. Romano looked at her for a moment. No, he said. He's not. The car took her home. She sat in the back and watched the city and felt the specific weight of a thing that had moved past the point of planning and into the point of happening. She went upstairs. She unlocked her door. She did the chain. She sat on her couch. Her phone buzzed. Not Romano's number. A number she didn't know. She let it ring. It rang again. She answered. Ms. Ashcroft. A voice she didn't know. Smooth, even, with a faint regional accent she couldn't place immediately. Midwest, but not Chicago. My name isn't important. I'm calling on behalf of some people who have an interest in the work you've been doing for Romano Industries. Her whole body went cold and completely still. I think you have the wrong number, she said. Network_full.xlsx, the voice said. 23.1 million, 11 pages of findings, sent to a private address at 11:52 last night. She didn't breathe. We're not your enemy, Ms. Ashcroft. We're actually in a position to offer you something Romano can't. A pause, calibrated. Safety. Permanent, guaranteed documented safety, in exchange for 1 copy of the file you sent last night. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. Ms. Ashcroft, we've been watching the 38th floor for 3 days. We know what you built. We know what it documents. We know that Romano now has a weapon that can destroy our operation before we're ready, and we know that weapon came from you." Another pause. "We're not asking you to betray him. We're asking you to save yourself. There's a difference." She said nothing. "You have until 6 a.m., the voice said. "After that, the offer changes shape." The line went dead. Elena sat in the silence of her apartment. The radiator was going, that familiar winter knock, and held the phone in both hands and looked at nothing. The Marchetti group had been watching the 38th floor for 3 days. They had intercepted enough to know the file existed and what it contained. Lang had not built their intelligence package alone. Someone with access to Romano's building systems, his communications infrastructure, had been feeding them in real time. Not just Lang, someone else. Someone she hadn't found in the documents. Someone who was inside Romano's organization right now. Tonight, who knew the analysis was complete. Who knew the dinner had happened. Who might know she was home alone in a studio apartment with a chain on the door and a radiator that knocked. She stood up. She walked to her window and stood to the side of it, not in front of it, and looked at the street below. A car she didn't recognize was parked across from her building. It had been there when she'd arrived. She hadn't noted it then. She was noting it now. She called Romano. He picked up on the second ring. "The Marchetti group just called me," she said. "They know about the file. They know what's in it. They've been watching the building for 3 days and they have someone inside your organization who's been feeding them in real time." She paused. "They want the file. They gave me until 6 a.m. A silence on the line that lasted long enough that she heard him breathing. "Are you in your apartment?" he said. "Yes." "Is the door locked?" "Yes." "Don't open it for anyone until my people arrive. 20 minutes. A pause. "Elena, the car across the street, silver, 2 occupants. Do not go near the windows." She stepped further back from the glass. "Romano," she said. "Yes." "The person inside your organization." She looked at the street, at the silver car, at the city going about its enormous indifferent business. "It's not just a communications leak, is it? They knew about tonight's dinner. They knew where I'd be, when the car was coming, which building. That's not someone with access to financial records." A silence. "No," he said. "It's not." "Who has access to your physical movements and your personal schedule?" Another silence, different from the first. Heavier. "A very short list," he said. "How short?" She heard him exhale, not dramatically, just a breath that carried weight. "Short enough that I should have seen it," he said, and didn't. She stood in her apartment in the dark, with the chain on the door and a silver car on the street, and 20 minutes until someone arrived who she would have to trust was Romano's people, and not something else entirely, and she understood, fully and without mitigation, what Romano had meant when he'd said, "You don't know the depth." This was the depth, not the financial structures, not the shell companies and the authorization chains and the 23 million. Those were the surface, the part that could be documented, analyzed, filed in an 11-page report with proper citations. The depth was this, a city-sized web of loyalty and betrayal and calculation, and she was now inside it, not observing it from a safe analytical distance, but physically, bodily inside it, in a dark apartment with a chain on the door. And there was no version of the next 6 hours in which she was not already compromised by the fact of her own existence in this story. She had walked into a room she didn't know was a room. She had done it voluntarily, with a flash drive in her pocket, and 17 pages of findings and the particular stubbornness of a person who couldn't leave numbers that didn't add up. She sat down on the floor, back against the wall, below the window line, and waited for a knock on her door. Her phone buzzed again. Not a call. A text from the unknown number. It was a photograph. She opened it. It was a photograph of Damian Romano's private office on the 38th floor, taken from inside the room, at an angle that could only have been from the chair across from his desk. The timestamp was from earlier tonight, while they had been at dinner. Someone had been in that office tonight, and they had wanted her to know it. She stared at the photograph. She stared at the timestamp. She stared at the angle of the shot. Not the room's general layout, not the window view, not anything decorative. The shot was framed on his desk, and specifically on the single physical document she had printed and left there this morning at his request. The final signed cover page of her 11-page analysis, with her name at the bottom, and the date, and she was still staring at the photograph when the knock came. 3 knocks. Measured. Then a voice she recognized, not Romano, but one of the 4 men from the first day, the one who had positioned himself nearest the elevator. She had not known his name until this moment. "Ms. Ashcroft, it's Reyes. Mr. Romano sent me." She got up off the floor. She looked at her door. She thought about the photograph on her phone, the timestamp, the angle of the shot, the signed cover page with her name at the bottom. She thought about a short list of people with access to Romano's physical movements and his personal schedule, and she thought about the fact that Reyes was on that list by definition. She thought about what it meant to open the door and what it meant not to. She opened it. Reyes was alone, mid-30s, compact, the specific stillness of someone trained to be still as a default state. He looked at her face and then passed her into the apartment in one practiced sweep. "Anyone come to the door before me?" he said. "No?" "The car across the street. Did it move?" "Not while I was watching." He came inside. He did not ask permission. He went to the window and stood to the side of it the same way she had. Checked the street, checked the car, checked the angle of the building entrance. Professional geometry. Then he turned. "We need to move you," he said. "Mr. Romano's location." "Show me a text from him," she said. He looked at her for a half second, not annoyed, just recalibrating, then pulled out his phone and turned it toward her. "Romano's message, sent 4 minutes ago. Reyes will bring you here. Trust him." She looked at the message. She looked at Reyes. She thought about the photograph again and the short list and all the things she could not verify from inside this apartment. She picked up her bag. "Let's go," she said. They went out through the building's rear door, through an alley she hadn't known existed, into a car she hadn't seen from her window. A different driver. South on Clark, then west, then a series of turns she tracked by instinct without having a map. Industrial blocks, warehousing, the part of the city that doesn't look like the version of Chicago on hotel brochures. The car stopped at a building with a loading dock and a steel door and no visible signage. Romano was inside. He was standing at a table covered in documents and a laptop when she came through the door, and he looked at her the way he'd looked at her in the lobby of the River North building. The quick practical assessment, checking her physical condition before anything else. Whatever he saw satisfied him. He nodded once. "You're all right," he said. "I'm fine." She came to the table. "Who has access to your schedule and your physical movements?" "Elena." "Who?" She put her phone on the table with the photograph visible. "Someone was in your office tonight. The timestamp is 9:47. We left for the restaurant at 7:15. The building should have been locked down for 3 hours. Who has override access to the 38th floor after hours?" He looked at the photograph. He looked at it for a long time. "Carla," he said. Elena went still. Carla. Who had shown her the exit route. Who had put a blanket on the corner chair at midnight. Who had been a fixed, neutral, frictionless presence on the 38th floor for the entirety of Elena's time there, moving through the space with the efficiency of someone who had been doing it so long it was automatic. Who had access to every document Elena had accessed, every file request she'd made, every email sent from the floor's internal systems. Who had known about the dinner tonight, had arranged the car. "How long?" Elena said. "I don't know yet." His voice was flat in a way that was different from the usual flatness. There was something underneath it that required effort to keep under. "I'm finding out." She gave them my home address. "Yes." She gave them the file contents. She had access to the server partition. Everything you sent me she could see. Elena sat down, not because she chose to. Her legs made the decision without consulting her. She sat in a metal chair next to the table and put both hands flat on the surface and breathed. Carla. The blanket on the chair. She made herself move past it. Sentiment was a luxury right now, and she was overdrawn. Lang accelerated, she said. After the lobby last night. You gave him 48 hours and he used the first 12 to activate whatever he was building toward. The Marchetti Group has been moving assets into the city since this morning, Romano said. 3 separate locations. We've been tracking them. He turned the laptop toward her. A map of Chicago, marked points scattered across the west and south sides. They're not here to negotiate. They're here to take the territory Lang promised them. She looked at the map. She looked at the cluster of marked points and did the same kind of spatial analysis she'd been applying to spreadsheets all week: pattern, timing, relationship between positions. The warehouse district, she said, south branch of the river. 3 of these points form a perimeter around it. That's our primary storage facility for the south side operation, he said. They're not hitting all your locations. They're hitting the one Lang knew was most critical. She looked up. He didn't just give them a map. He gave them a priority list. Romano's jaw tightened. A small movement, controlled, but she saw it. We have people at the facility, he said. But if Marchetti hits all 3 perimeter points simultaneously, they'll stretch your response. You can't reinforce everywhere at once. She looked at the map again. When? Our best read is tonight. The asset movement patterns suggest they're staging, not settled. He paused. Which means we have maybe 4 hours. The room had 4 other people in it besides her and Romano and Reyes, men she hadn't been formally introduced to, positioned around the space with the deliberate ease of people who were very used to waiting in rooms like this for things to start. She had been in Romano's orbit for 8 days now, and she had learned to read the temperature of the people around him the way she'd learned to read the floor at Hargrove, by the ambient quality of their attention. Right now that quality was taut, coiled. I need to find Carla, Romano said, and I need to find Lang. Lang will be with Marchetti, she said. He's not running. He accelerated, which means he thinks they can win. He'll be where the action is. She looked at the map. Here. She put her finger on the warehouse district point. He'll want to be there when it falls. He's been building toward this for 4 years. He wants to see it. Romano looked at where her finger was. That's where I'm going, he said. She looked at him. I'm coming with you, she said. No. I know the financial documentation better than anyone in this room. If we take Lang alive and you need to get information out of him about the full scope of what he gave Marchetti, what they know, what they're planning beyond tonight, I'm the only person who can verify it against the records. I know what's missing from what I found. I know where the gaps are. Silence. She's right, Reyes said from somewhere behind her. Romano looked at Reyes, then at Elena. The muscle in his jaw moved again. You stay with Reyes, he said. You don't move without him. You don't go into any space before it's cleared. Understood. I mean it, Elena. I heard you. They moved out at 1:15 in the morning. 3 cars. She was in the second one with Reyes and a man named Cho, who drove without speaking and kept his eyes moving between the road and the mirrors with the metronome regularity of someone who had been doing this specific thing for a long time. The city was not empty at this hour. Chicago was never empty. But the industrial corridor they were moving through had the particular 2 a.m. quality of a place whose daytime population had entirely evacuated, leaving behind only infrastructure and darkness and the specific smell of the river. Elena sat in the back seat and kept her hands still in her lap and managed her breathing. She thought about Carla and the blanket, and then she stopped thinking about Carla and focused on what was ahead. The warehouse facility was 3 connected buildings along the river, a complex that from the outside looked like any other light industrial operation on this stretch. She'd seen it referenced in the documents, not described, just referenced as a location identifier. In person, it was larger than she'd pictured. Loading docks on the south face, a rail access line that hadn't been used in years judging by the weed growth along it. Exterior lighting sparse and strategic, enough to see by, not enough to see clearly from a distance. Romano's first car had already stopped a block away. He was out, speaking to 2 men she didn't recognize when their car pulled up. Reyes put a hand on her arm before she opened the door. You hear shooting, he said. You get down and you stay down. You don't try to move toward it. You don't try to help. You get flat and you wait. Okay, she said. I need you to actually mean that. I mean it, she said. She got out. The night was cold and wet, the river smelled heavy, a fine mist that wasn't quite rain moving through the loading dock lights. She pulled her jacket tighter. Romano was 40 feet away. He turned when she came around the car, and for a moment in the dock lights, she saw his face with unusual clarity. The controlled authority still there. Absolutely. But underneath it, something she recognized from the night before. The fractional gap. The seam. He was afraid for something, not for himself. She walked toward him. Reyes stayed at her left shoulder. The perimeter units have engaged at 2 of the 3 points, Romano said to the group when she reached him. His voice was the operational voice, flat, precise, entirely in command. Marchetti is moving the main force here in approximately 20 minutes. They'll expect us to be managing the perimeter and underpopulated at the primary location. He looked at the men around him. We're not. Someone to her right said, Lang? He'll come in with the main force. Let him get inside. I want him inside where there's nowhere to go. He paused. Nobody touches Lang before I talk to him. Understood. The group moved. She stayed with Reyes at the east end of the loading dock, under an overhang out of the light. The waiting was physical. She felt it in her chest, in the shortened cycle of her breathing, in the way every sound in the surrounding dark registered as larger than it probably was. A chain somewhere. The river. The distant city noise that never fully stopped. Reyes stood beside her and was very still. She matched his stillness as best she could. 12 minutes. Then the south face lit up. It was not what she expected. Not a Hollywood explosion, not a dramatic breach. It was several things happening simultaneously. Headlights cutting through the loading dock entrance. Voices that were not Romano's people. The sharp, flat sounds of a physical confrontation somewhere inside the building that she felt rather than heard. Then the lights inside the facility came on. All of them, suddenly, flooding the interior and the dock. And she understood that was Romano's doing, stripping away the darkness that the incoming force had been counting on. Reyes moved her back against the wall. Stay here, he said, and went forward to the dock entrance, and she stayed. She stayed against the wall and listened to the sounds from inside the facility resolve into something she could partially parse. There were shouts, the sounds of movement that was not careful, the specific quality of a space where a large number of people were moving fast in a confined area and making contact with things. She kept her breathing even. She kept her eyes on the dock entrance. Victor Lang came through it at a run. He came through the dock entrance fast and wrong. Not the controlled movement of someone executing a plan, but the ungoverned movement of someone whose plan had just catastrophically failed. His jacket was gone. There was blood on his shirt, on the left side, and he was holding his arm against his ribs in a way that suggested something beneath the hand wasn't right. He was looking behind him. He ran directly into Elena. He grabbed her arm before she could move, not intentionally, reflexively, the grab of a man catching his balance. And then he saw her face and went absolutely still. For a fraction of a second, they looked at each other. His face was different from every version she'd seen before. The collegial performance was gone. The calculated smile was gone. What was left was older and raw and very afraid, and underneath the fear was something that surprised her. Not anger at her, something closer to a terrible recognition. You, he said. He was breathing hard, chest heaving, the blood on his shirt spreading slowly. You have any idea what you walked into? Yes, she said. You don't. You think you do. He tightened his grip on her arm, not aggressively. It was more like he needed the contact to stay upright. He's going to use you, and he's going to leave you in the same place he leaves everyone. Let go of my arm, she said. I'm trying to... Let go. He did. He stepped back. He looked at the dock entrance. He looked at Elena. He made some internal calculation she could see moving across his exhausted face. The file, he said. Your analysis. Did you keep a copy? She said nothing. The flash drive, he said. I know you took one. On the first day. He was watching her with the remnant of that original intelligence. Still functional under the fear, still precise. If Romano goes down tonight, you'll need it. And if he doesn't, enough. Romano came through the dock entrance. He was not injured. He was breathing hard, jacket still on, and he moved with the particular quality of a man who has just come out of the most physical version of a confrontation and has arrived at its conclusion. He looked at Lang. He looked at Elena. He looked at Lang's hand, where it had been on her arm, the space between them now. He walked forward and stopped 6 feet from Lang. They looked at each other. Elena had spent 8 days learning the language of Romano's stillness, its registers, its meanings, the difference between contained and controlling and concluding. She had not yet seen this register. This was beyond control. This was a man looking at something he had built over years, that he had trusted, that had been dismantling itself from the inside with a quiet and deliberate patience, and arriving at the end of the long patience required to have not seen it. 6 years, Romano said. Lang said nothing. 6 years, he said again, and the second time was different. Not louder, but deeper. Weighted with something that was not anger exactly, but the foundation of anger, the structural thing beneath it. I gave you a floor of this building, Victor. I gave you the contracts and the access and the room to build real things, not cover real things. You built real things and got real things in return, Lang said. His voice was flat, exhausted, stripped down to its actual material. While you ran this organization from a throne I helped construct. You were paid. I was managed, Lang said, compensated, allocated, assigned a role in an empire I didn't inherit. He was bleeding through his shirt, holding his arm, and he was still arguing with the clean directness of a man who had been saving this argument for years. You didn't build this alone, Damien. Nobody who works for you built it alone. But you're the only one it belongs to. Romano was quiet. So you burned it, he said. I redirected it, Lang said. You put a target on every person in this organization. You gave Marchetti the locations, the names. Romano's voice had dropped in volume, which was worse. You gave them Marcus Henley's home address, Victor. He has a daughter. Something moved through Lang's face, not regret, but the proximity of regret, the awareness of it. Where's Carla? Romano said. Lang looked at him. She came to me, Lang said, not the other way. The silence that followed that sentence had a specific weight. Elena felt it from 8 feet away. She watched Romano absorb it, not visibly, not with any external movement, internally. She could see him absorbing it the way she'd seen him absorb the number 23 million, with the flat, containing patience of a man moving very quickly through a decision that needed to be finished. Where is she? He said. Gone, Lang said. She was gone before tonight started. She's not your problem anymore. He paused. She wanted out. She just needed the exit financed. From somewhere inside the building, a voice called Romano's name. He didn't turn. The Marchetti operation, he said. Everything you gave them. Personnel, locations, schedules, financial structures. I need it all. Tonight. And then what? And then we determine what comes next. Lang looked at him. He looked at Elena. He looked at Romano again. You'll determine it, he said. That's always been the issue, hasn't it? Romano said nothing. Lang nodded slowly. He reached into his inside jacket pocket with his good arm, moving with deliberate visibility, no sudden angles. He produced a phone. He held it out. Encrypted backup, he said. Full intelligence package. Everything I built. He held it steady, arm extended, bleeding slowly through his shirt. The access code is my daughter's birthday, December 9th, 2001. He paused. I want your word that she doesn't get touched. Romano looked at the phone. He looked at Lang. She was never part of this, he said. She won't be. Lang stood there for one more second. Then something in him, the last structural thing holding the shape of Victor Lang, SVP, architect, the man who'd built real things and burned them, came undone. Not dramatically. It went the way things go when they've been holding past their capacity for too long, quietly, with almost no sound, into something much smaller than what it had been. He set the phone in Romano's hand. Romano looked at Elena. His eyes moved over her face in the dock lights. The same assessment as before, checking for damage, checking for what the last 20 minutes had cost her. Are you all right? He said. She was cold and her legs were not entirely steady, and she had watched a man disintegrate from the inside out 10 feet in front of her, and she had a flash drive in her jacket pocket that Lang had somehow known about, which meant Carla had known about, which meant the copy she'd made on day one as a hedge against she didn't know what had been visible to the wrong people from the beginning. Yes, she said. I'm all right. He looked at her for one more second. Then he looked back at Lang. Get him inside, he said to Reyes. Medical first. Reyes moved. Elena stayed where she was. The mist was still coming off the river, fine and cold. The loading dock lights buzzed. Somewhere in the south perimeter, the last of the Marchetti advance was being resolved. She could tell by the way the ambient noise of the facility was changing, less urgent, more procedural, the sound of a situation moving from active to contained. Romano was still standing close enough that she could have touched him. "Carla," she said. "I know," he said. "You didn't see it." "No." He said it without apology and without self-punishment, straight factual acknowledgement. "I didn't see it." "How?" "She'd been with the organization for 11 years. He paused. "Loyalty gets assumed. That's how." Elena thought about 11 years, about the efficiency, the economy of motion, the specific frictionlessness of someone who had been doing a job so long it looked like they had stopped thinking about it. She thought about what it meant to be in the right position to see everything while appearing to be the person who simply arranged things. "She's not gone," Elena said. "She wouldn't leave without certainty that it worked. She'll be watching to see if Marchetti achieved its objectives." Romano turned to look at her. "If she's watching," he said slowly. "She's trackable," Elena said. "Her exit was financed. That means there's a transaction. There's always a transaction." She looked at him. "Give me the server access again, and 4 hours." He looked at her for a long moment. The dock lights buzzed. The river moved in the dark beyond the fence. "Reyes," he said. Reyes appeared from the dock entrance. "Get her a laptop and the full server credentials," Romano said, "and stay with her." He looked at Elena one more time, and in the dock lights, with the mist off the river and the sounds of a confrontation settling into its aftermath all around them, she saw the gap again. Not fractional now. Wider. The place where the controlled surface had a seam and something underneath it was visible, not vulnerability exactly, but the threshold of it. The place right before a man who has never permitted himself to need anything admits that he does. He turned and walked back into the building. Elena stood in the cold dock air and breathed, and thought about a transaction Carla had needed to complete before she could disappear, and thought about the flash drive in her pocket that had been visible to the wrong people since day one, and thought about the document with her name at the bottom sitting on Romano's desk in a photograph sent to her phone at 9:47 p.m. by someone who wanted her to know exactly how exposed she was. And she understood with complete clarity that the next 4 hours were the last 4 hours before everything resolved in one direction or the other, and there would be... The laptop arrived in 4 minutes. Reyes set it on a folding table inside the facility's east office, a room that had clearly been used for inventory management at some point. Metal shelving along 2 walls, a whiteboard with numbers that meant nothing to her, a single overhead fluorescent that buzzed at a frequency she decided to ignore. She sat down. She opened the server connection with the credentials Romano had authorized. She started looking for Carla. The logic was simple enough. Carla's exit had been financed by Lang's network, which meant a transfer had moved through one of the structures Elena had already documented. The timing would be recent, within the last 72 hours most likely, staged to clear before the Marchetti operation reached its conclusion. Carla was not the kind of person who left things to chance. 11 years of managing Romano's operational details meant she understood exactly how financial trails worked and exactly how to minimize them, which meant the transfer would be small, structured to read as routine, routed through an entity that had legitimate transactional history. Elena opened network_full.xlsx. She went to the Meridian structure first, not because she thought that was where the transfer was, but because she knew it best, and knowing a structure meant knowing where the anomalies should not be. She scanned the last 96 hours of documented transaction flow. Nothing irregular. Second structure. Third. The fourth structure, the oldest, the one with 4 years of history, had a transaction dated 2 days ago. $47,000, outbound, routed through the secondary holding entity to an account number she didn't recognize. The transaction was coded as a vendor payment. The vendor identifier was a company name that had appeared once in the documentation, in a footnote, in a context that had read at the time as administrative. She pulled the vendor registration. 15 seconds of cross-referencing. The company had been registered 18 months ago in Nevada. One officer of record. The registered agent address was a mail forwarding service in Reno. The officer's name was a name Elena did not recognize. She stared at it. She pulled the secondary documentation, the formation papers, the registered agent filings, the EIN application. She went to the EIN application, which required a responsible party with a social security number. The responsible party was listed as C. Marsh, Carla's last name. She had never known Carla's last name. It had not, until this moment, seemed like information she needed. She wrote down the account number the 47,000 had moved to. She ran the account number through the transaction records for all four structures, looking for prior appearances. It came up 3 times: 6 months ago, 14 months ago, 2 years ago. Small transfers each time. Patient, slow accumulation. Carla had been building her exit fund inside the structures for 2 years, using the same architecture Lang had used for the main theft, moving amounts small enough to be invisible inside the larger transaction flow. She had learned it from watching the structures being built. She had watched Lang construct the mechanism, and then she had quietly built her own smaller version inside it, a parasite inside a parasite, and for 2 years nobody had seen it. Elena almost admired it. She typed up the account number, the routing information, the transaction history, the Sia Marsh registration, the Nevada company. She sent it to Romano's private address. She added one line at the bottom. The receiving account will have a linked correspondent bank. 47,000 will have moved again within 24 hours. The correspondent bank can flag the destination in real time if you move now. She hit send. She sat back. Reyes was standing by the door. He looked at her. "Done?" he said. "Done," she said. Romano's response came in 3 minutes. "Good. Stay where you are." She looked at the fluorescent light buzzing overhead. She thought about the 4 years of transactions she'd lived inside for the last week, the shell companies, the authorization chains, the patient incremental theft of $23 million, and whatever it was Carla had accumulated in the smaller version. She thought about the people who had built those structures, not stupidly, not carelessly, but with genuine intelligence and sustained discipline applied to the project of taking from someone who trusted them. She thought about trust as a structural vulnerability, the way it worked the same as an audit gap, a space in the system where scrutiny didn't reach because the assumption of reliability had replaced it. She thought about Damian Romano, 11 years of daily proximity to a woman he had not scrutinized, and what that said about the difference between the things you see and the things you assume you don't need to look at. She put her hands flat on the table. She was tired in a way that had gone below muscle and bone into something more foundational. 9 days. It had been 9 days since the private elevator opened, and she had looked up from meridian_review_draft_v4.docx, and every subsequent version of her life had been revised without her consent. She was not the same person who had put a folded business card under a wobbly chair leg and called that an accommodation. She was not sure yet what she was instead. Carla was found at 4:30 in the morning, not by Romano's people, by a bank compliance flag triggered by an automated monitoring request that Elena's account routing information had enabled. The 47,000 had moved to a correspondent account in Toronto within 2 hours of Elena's message, and the Toronto account had a linked wire instruction to a private account in the Cayman Islands, and the compliance flag had caught the wire instruction in the processing queue before it cleared. Romano told her this in the East office at 4:47 a.m. He had come in directly, still in the same clothes, and he sat across from her at the folding table and put his hands on the surface and looked at her with the complete attention she had come to know as his default mode of presence. "She was at O'Hare," he said. "International Terminal. She had a flight to Toronto at 6:15. "She's in custody," Elena said. Not a question. "She will be," he said. "By morning." Elena nodded. "The Marchetti operation," she said, "contained 3 of their people taken. The rest withdrew when it became clear the facility wasn't what they'd been told it was." He paused. Lang's intelligence was 4 weeks old on the personnel deployment at the Southside location. He didn't know we'd moved the primary operations 2 months ago. He gave them outdated information. He gave them what he had. He'd been cut out of the operational briefings for 6 weeks. I'd started to notice the edges of something wrong without being able to name it. He looked at his hands on the table. "If I'd named it sooner—" "You couldn't have," she said. He looked up. "The financial documentation goes back 4 years," she said. "The architecture was designed to be invisible to anyone not specifically looking for it. You couldn't have seen it from inside the operational structure. That's the point of the structure. It's invisible to trust." He was quiet for a moment. "You sound like you've made peace with it," he said. "I sound like I understand the mechanism," she said. "That's different." He looked at her. The fluorescent overhead buzzed. Outside, the first thin light of a Chicago November morning was beginning to do something tentative to the sky above the river. Lang gave us everything, Romano said, the full Marchetti intelligence package, their Chicago operation structure, the 3 other Midwest markets they've been building toward. He was thorough. Even at the end, he was thorough. He's a precise man, Elena said. He was. A pause. He's being moved to a secure location outside the city. He won't be in a position to be a problem. She heard the specific weight of what secure location meant in the context of Romano's world. His daughter, she said. She doesn't know anything. She won't be touched. He said it without hesitation. I keep my word. She believed him. She had 8 days of evidence for the things Damian Romano kept and the things he didn't, and she believed him. What happens to Marcus Webb and Patricia Hollis? She said. Webb is already gone. He left the country 2 days ago. Lang warned him the same night he visited your office. We're tracking him. He paused. Hollis cooperated. She documented everything she'd approved, every payment she'd received. She'll face appropriate consequences. Another pause, careful. Legal ones. Through proper channels. The legitimate side of this organization doesn't settle its accounts the way the other side does. Elena looked at him. Is that a distinction you make deliberately? She said. Or is it just what's practical? He held her gaze. Both, he said. Always both. That's the honest answer. She nodded slowly. Outside, a truck moved through the loading area. One of Romano's people, wrapping up the night's logistics, the organized post-action work of a structure that knew how to clean up after itself. She listened to it and felt the building settle around her, the acute tension of the last several hours releasing incrementally from the walls and the air. You said you were still deciding, she said. He looked at her. About your father's inheritance? She said. What you do with it? You said you were still deciding. He was quiet for a moment. I remember, he said. After tonight, she said, is the decision any clearer? He looked at the table between them. He looked at his hands. He looked at her with the gap fully present in his expression. Not fractional now, not hidden behind the controlled surface. Open. The most open she had seen him. The legitimate side is real, he said. I meant it when I said that, the infrastructure, the employment, the development. I've spent 15 years building those things because my father was right that they should be real. He paused. But the other side is also real, and it doesn't untangle cleanly. There's no version where I separate them at this point and both survive intact. So what do you do with that, she said. I run it as well as I can, he said. I keep the people in it as safe as I can. I don't expand the criminal side. I haven't expanded it in 6 years. I build the legitimate side until the weight of it is heavier than the other. He paused. And I try not to lie to myself about what I am. Elena sat with that. It was not a satisfying answer. It was not a clean answer. It was the answer of a man who had inherited a complicated thing and was managing it with as much integrity as the thing permitted, which was not very much and was also not nothing. And she found, sitting in a folding chair in a River District warehouse at 5 a.m. with dried adrenaline in her bloodstream and 9 days of compressed experience behind her, that she could hold that complexity without needing to resolve it. She was not sure when that capacity had developed. I want the financial division, she said. He almost smiled. Almost. I know, he said. Not a title. Actual authority. The full analytic structure, direct reporting, independent audit capability. I want to be able to see everything and report what I see without asking permission. That's a significant ask. You gave a man 6 years and a floor of a building and he stole $23 million, she said. I found it in 11 days. I think the ask is proportionate. He was quiet for a moment, then, yes. And I report findings as I find them, she said, including findings about the parts of this organization I'm not supposed to know about. He looked at her steadily. Within limits, he said. Define the limits clearly, and I'll work within them. Leave them undefined, and I'll assume I have no limits. That could be dangerous for you. I've been managing danger for 9 days, she said. I'm developing a tolerance. He held her gaze for a long moment. The gap was still there, wider than she'd ever seen it, and she was close enough to see it clearly. The place where the architecture of control had its seam, and something underneath it was simply a man, present and unguarded in the specific way that only exhaustion and honesty together can produce. "Agreed," he said. "All of it." She nodded once. She looked at the laptop screen. She closed network_full.xlsx for the last time. They sat in silence for a while, which was its own kind of communication. Neither of them feeling it, neither of them uncomfortable with it, just the two of them and the fluorescent buzz and the early morning river sounds, and the particular quality of stillness that comes after something large has moved through a space and not destroyed it. 3 weeks passed. The work was real. That was the first thing she established. Not symbolically, not performatively, but in the actual daily texture of it. She moved into the financial division's leadership office on a Monday morning with a printed copy of the agreed reporting structure, a new laptop, and a list of 7 immediate priorities she'd built over the previous 10 days, while the post-operation logistics were still resolving. By Friday of the first week, she had identified 2 additional irregularities in the division's existing account management, minor compared to the Meridian network, but real. And she documented them and sent the documentation directly to Romano and did not soften the language. His response? "Fix it." She fixed it. Marcus Webb was located in Lisbon 3 weeks after he left the country. Elena was not involved in what happened after that. She did not ask. She made a deliberate choice about the line between what she needed to know and what would cost her more than it gave her, and she held that line. Patricia Hollis resigned. The resignation was described in the firm's internal communication as voluntary, which was technically accurate in the way that many technical accuracies are. She cooperated fully with the internal audit Elena led in the following weeks, and the documentation she provided closed several gaps in the record that would otherwise have required months to reconstruct. Carla Marsh was taken at O'Hare before the 6:15 to Toronto. Elena did not see her again and did not expect to. She thought about her sometimes, not with anger because anger required a kind of betrayal, and Elena had not known Carla well enough to be betrayed by her. She thought about her with something closer to a professional respect that she was not entirely comfortable with, and which she eventually filed in the category of things that were true and did not require resolution. Victor Lang's daughter, according to a discreet inquiry Elena made through legitimate channels 3 weeks out, was a 24-year-old veterinary student in Madison, Wisconsin, who had no knowledge of what her father had done and whose life had not, as far as Elena could determine, been disrupted. She filed that information somewhere inside herself and left it there. On a Thursday evening in late November, Romano found her at her desk at 7:30. Later than she'd meant to stay, absorbed in a quarterly projection model she was rebuilding from scratch, because the previous version had been built on assumptions she didn't trust. He stood in the doorway. "Still here," he said. "The projection model is wrong from the foundation up," she said. "Someone built it to confirm the numbers they wanted rather than to test them. I'm fixing it. Leave it for tomorrow." She looked at the screen. She looked at the doorway. She thought about the 7 priority items and the quarterly model and the 2 minor irregularities she'd fixed in the first week and the ongoing work of building something that could actually bear weight. She saved the file. She shut down the monitor. They walked out of the building together. Not with the 4-man perimeter, not with the operational weight of the previous weeks. Just 2 people, jackets against the November cold, walking north on a street where the city was doing its ordinary evening business around them. Traffic. Restaurant windows lit and full. The smell of the lake 2 miles east, cold and vast and reliably there. He walked without his usual deliberate economy. More simply, she noticed the difference. They walked without talking for a while, which had become a thing they did. The silence that didn't require maintenance. She had learned his silences the way she'd learned to read the floor at Hargrove, by the quality of them, what they contained, the difference between controlled and resting and considering. This one was resting. They came to the bridge, the one on the Riverwalk, the pedestrian span where the city opened up on both sides, the skyline doing its enormous blazing thing to the north, and the river moving darkly below, the light from the towers falling on the water in broken pieces. They stopped, by some mutual unspoken agreement, at the railing. Chicago at night from a bridge was one of those things that did not photograph accurately because the photographs captured the scale but not the sound, the wind off the river, the low continuous breath of the city, the way it pressed against you while simultaneously ignoring you completely. She leaned her arms on the railing and looked north and let the cold come in through her jacket. He stood beside her. "I'm going to ask you something," he said, "and you can tell me to mind my own business." She waited. "The flash drive," he said. "You still have it?" She looked at the water. "Yes," she said. He nodded. "It's a hedge," she said. "Not against you specifically. Against any version of circumstances where having documentation outside the system is the difference between having a position and not having one." She paused. "You would do the same." "I would," he said. So nothing," he said. "I'm not asking you to give it up. I'm asking because I wanted to know if you'd be honest about it." She looked at him. "And?" she said. "And you were," he said, simply. The river moved below them. A boat went under the bridge, a service vessel, working late, its running lights making two red points in the dark water and then receding south. They watched it until it was gone. "My mother called last week," Elena said. "She asked what I was doing. I said I'd been promoted to lead the financial division of a major investment firm." "That's accurate," he said. "I left out some context." "Also accurate." She felt something move through her that was not quite a laugh but was related to one. The kind of thing that comes when the gap between the version of your life you can describe to your mother and the version you're actually living becomes both very large and, somehow, sustainable. She had a job that was real. She had authority she could use. She had a clear line of sight into a financial structure that had been corrupted and was now, incrementally, being made less so. She had chosen this, with her eyes open, in a room with exits guarded by men who moved wrong, and the choice had cost her the invisible life and the wobbling chair in the studio apartment where nothing required her to be anything in particular. What it had given her was harder to name. She was still working on the name. He turned from the railing to face her, which made her turn to face him. The city light was on both of them, the broken orange-white of it off the water. And she saw him clearly, the way she'd seen him clearly in the loading dock lights. The controlled authority that was real and not a performance, and the gap in it that was also real. And the man in the gap who had over 9 days and $23 million and a conspiracy that had run 4 years before she'd found it, made room for her in a life that had not previously included anyone who told him what they actually found. "The dangerous world surrounding me," he said. Quiet. Careful. She recognized it, from the resolution she'd been told about, the promise described in the brief she'd been given on the first day, the thing he'd decided to say. She waited. "I can't promise it won't touch you," he said. "I told you I keep my word. I won't make a promise I can't keep." "I know that," she said. "What I can promise is that I'll tell you the truth about what it is, about what you're standing inside of. No managed distance, no information allocation." He paused. "What you found in those documents, the complete picture, not the sanitized version. That's what you get. All of it." She looked at him. "That's a harder promise than the other one," she said. "Yes," he said. "Why make it?" He held her gaze. The gap was fully open. No controlled flatness, no surface management. Just the man underneath, who had inherited a complicated thing and was managing it as honestly as it permitted, and who had, in the last 9 days, stopped being alone in that management in a way he had apparently not been before. "Because you already know what questions to ask," he said, "and you won't stop asking them. And I've spent 15 years in rooms with people who stopped asking questions, and I don't—" He stopped. He looked at the water for a moment. He looked back. "I don't want that. Not anymore." Elena looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the business card under the chair leg, the gas station travel mug, the 17 pages she'd almost never submitted. The woman who had spent 8 months perfecting the art of being invisible because visible felt like it cost too much, and what it had cost her to stop being invisible, and what she had found on the other side of that cost. She thought about her mother's money, taken twice by people who were technically operating within the rules. She thought about $23 million moved in multiples too clean to be accidental and a name at the bottom of 14 authorization signatures, and what it meant to find the thing everyone with more power than you had chosen not to find. She thought about what it meant to stand beside someone who ran a world she couldn't fully endorse and couldn't fully walk away from, and who had looked, across a folding table at 5 a.m, directly at the most complicated version of his own life, and not looked away from it. She turned back to the railing. She looked north at the city, the towers, the light, the enormous indifferent blazing permanence of it. He moved his hand along the railing until it was next to hers. She turned her hand over. He took it. They stood there, the two of them, on the bridge above the river, the city burning around them and the cold coming off the water and November doing what November does in Chicago, which is remind you that the world is larger and older and less manageable than any plan you have made for it. She was afraid still. She wanted to be honest with herself about that. The slower kind, the kind that lives in the stomach and adjusts its weight as new information arrives. She did not expect it to go away. She had stopped expecting her life to be a place where the things that mattered did not also cost something. But she was here. Voluntarily, eyes open, with a flash drive in her jacket pocket and 11 pages of documented findings and the specific stubborn competence of a person who could not leave numbers that didn't add up. She was here, and she was not invisible, and the man standing beside her had his hand around hers and was looking at the same city, and neither of them needed to say anything else tonight. The river moved below them in the dark. Chicago went on being Chicago, vast and cold and lit from every angle, full of people running their own calculations, keeping their own costs, building their own structures that would hold or wouldn't, that would be found or wouldn't, that would mean something or prove to have meant something different than they'd planned. It went on being what it was, and they stood on this bridge above it, and the wind came off the water, and Elena Ashcroft, who had once folded a business card under a chair leg and called it enough, held on,